If you throw away dirty for ground, another person self throw away dirty. Everybody come begin to throw away dirty for ground. Everywhere go call the smell. Gutter go block, road go block, and you will like to dey dab. I say no more dabbing for you, be that too.
Dab, 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 dab. Yes.
Yes, it be like say they want to tell us another story again, yo. Now so, you know, say people they say I be superstar, but for me, the real superstars are those people where they go vote for the candidate of their choice without violence. So for these upcoming elections, be my superstar. Vote, no fights, no violence, because the election will be won. We work together so the future will be brighter.
Police deployed special intervention force to Kaduna as curfew is imposed on Kaduna metropolis and environs.
More endorsements for President Buhari as Ogun State Governor and Alake of Egbaland visit State House.
Ahead of 2019 elections, Nigerian Television Authority enhances capacity of personnel for effective coverage.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss the implementation of the No Work, No Pay policy.
Industrial dispute, particularly strike actions by unions, is a common occurrence in Nigeria, which not only causes disruption to the economy, but also brings severe inconveniences and suffering to the public in most cases.
There's no doubt about that, Kirian, but of course it may be difficult to count the number of times Nigerians have been subjected to hardship as a result of the withdrawal of services by employees of the public or private sector workers due to disputes with their employers.
Now, the unions will always explain that their decision to withdraw their services is a last resort after attempts to settle grievances fail and their demands not met. They are also insisting that the language many employers unfortunately understand is strike.
Well, Kieran, as you very well know, that's a contentious point that you have just raised that will, of course, provoke a series of counter positions. But what is clear is that the decision of the Federal Executive Council to enforce the no work, no pay rule appears to some to be a game changer, as it might usher in a new dimension in labor relations.
Of course, Kinsley, you know, the decision of the Federal Executive Council flows from the white paper, which emanated from the work of a panel to harmonize contentious or gray areas in industrial relations, inaugurated in April 2016, which submitted its report in October 2017.
Now, the decision by the Federal Executive Council, of course, covers both the employers and the employees, because what the law actually says is that if an employer locks out workers without passing through due process, the worker or workers are assumed to have been at work and will therefore receive all remunerations and allowances for that period. But then when workers proceed on strike, the principle of no work, no pay will also be applied as enshrined in Section 43 of the Trade Disputes Act.
Of course, the organized labor is kicking against the decision of the government, insisting that workers have the right to withdraw their services when they are not satisfied and when they are not paid for services rendered.
One question to ask is whether the restatement of the policy as already enshrined in the law will bring sanity and stability to industrial relations in Nigeria. What are the gains for both the employer and the employee potentially? And is there room for further discussion on this matter? And how will this, of course, impact on productivity and ultimately wealth creation and economic well-being in the long term?
Germane questions, indeed, Kingsley. Perhaps it is worth noting also that there are other issues in industrial relations that the government white paper addresses, which will be unveiled subsequently.
No doubt about that, Kirian, but we'll have in the course of our conversation segment on Good Morning Nigeria today, guests who will address the questions and issues that we have raised with regard to the white paper that the federal government has released, what the Federal Executive Council considered was a draft. So the final white paper is out with regard again to the restatement on the policies on lockouts as well as industrial actions, that's to say strike actions by workers. It's on that note we'd like to welcome you to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. My name is Kingsley Osadolo. As always, we are broadcasting live from the Abuja headquarters studios of the Nigerian Television Authority, Africa's largest TV network.
And I am Kirian Yuma. It's always good to have you join us on the program. Today is the first edition for the week. And as always, the complimentary segments of the program shall be brought to you. They include newspaper review, business, sports, foreign and entertainment news. For now, Najatu Tijani is ready to serve us the morning news. Hello, Najatu.
Good morning, Kirian and Kingsley. Thank you for joining us on the news segment. Kaduna State Government has imposed a 24-hour curfew on Kaduna metropolis and environs to forestall the breakdown of law and order. Governor Nasir El-Rufai, in an interview with NTA News, said the curfew was necessary to safeguard lives and property and arrest those fomenting trouble. Meanwhile, the Nigerian police force has deployed a special intervention force to restore lasting peace to Kasuwa Magani and other areas in the state. Force Public Relations Officer, Acting Deputy Commissioner of Police, Jimoh Moshood, disclosed this while parading a notorious gang of kidnappers and armed robbery suspects in Abuja.
To achieve success in the operation, the force will be proactive and strict in the enforcement of its mandate, the police standard operation procedure, and rules of engagement. The force will ensure also the full enforcement of the curfew imposed on Kasuwa Magani and environment by the Kaduna State government.
Meanwhile, Governor Ibikunle Amosun of Ogun State is reassuring Nigerians of his irrevocable commitment to the APC, describing insinuations in some quarters about his purported defection from the governing party as baseless and mischievous. The governor made the clarification while speaking to NTA News after an audience with President Muhammadu Buhari behind closed doors. State House correspondent Adamu Sambu reports that Governor Amosun was accompanied on the visit by the Alake of Egbaland and Chairman Ogun State Council of Obas, Oba Adedotun Aremu Badebo.
I'm not with President Muhammadu Buhari because he's the president, no. It's not, in fact, it doesn't have anything to do with politics. So we will stick with him through thin and thin. We will. So I want them to know that we are not going anywhere. I'm going to be in APC. We are in APC. And even when after even his second term, which by the grace of God and the support of all Nigerians, he will win.
And still on party affairs, the All Progressives Congress, APC, says the party, under the national chairmanship of Comrade Adams Oshomole, is in safe hands as it marches to victory in the 2019 general elections. In a statement, the party said Comrade Oshomole did not become national chairman of the party to bring it down, but to deploy his capacity to strengthen and reposition the APC to be a truly supreme and disciplined political party. The statement added that overall, Comrade Oshomole has not, since stepping into the saddle, taken any unilateral decision in the running of the affairs of the party, noting that all decisions so far have passed through the mills of the National Working Committee deliberative sessions. The statement signed by the Chief Press Secretary to the National Chairman, Simon Ebebulem, said Comrade Oshomole assured all stakeholders of the APC of his respect and readiness to work with them for the good of the party. The world, and indeed Nigerians, are in for world-class coverage of the 2019 general elections with the Nigeria Television Authority. The largest television network is repositioning to offer clean, clear and professional services using advanced broadcast technology and well-trained personnel.
Once we have quite good time before the elections, hopefully we're gonna do another training when we deploy the system in NTA here.
We will deploy the right equipment and the right people who are equally equipped with the skills to carry out that coverage. We believe we will deliver a very good coverage for the elections come 2019.
As part of his media engagement in London, the Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed has met with the London-based English weekly magazine, The Economist.
The Economist is actually very well briefed about the progress, we've made. And like I told The Economist, that the 2019 election is a stark choice between going back to the corrupt ways of the PDP and moving forward and a future where the nation's resources will be used for the benefit of Nigerians. It also offered me the opportunity to tell them, and they concur that with what we've been able to achieve in terms of infrastructure development, the fact that in 2 years the government had invested about $7.5 billion on roads, bridges, power, and the like, and the fact that the business environment is now much more friendly than it used to be before.
And on to diplomatic relations. The federal government has demanded full autopsy and investigation from the Kenyan government into the killing of a Nigerian, Mr. Bamiyo Ashadi, allegedly killed by the Kenyan police. A statement by Abdurrahman Balogun, media aide to Abike Dabiri Erewa, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Foreign Affairs and Diaspora. The reported killing was contained in a briefing by the Nigerian ambassador in Kenya, Shede Momo. That's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kieran and Kingsley after the break.
Unemployment, notably youth unemployment, features strongly in our party's manifesto. We intend to attack the problem frontally through revival of agriculture.
The 30K is going a long way. Actually, I bought an acre of land for 60K like 2012, and presently I have a cassava farm and a yam farm.
Reorganized, trained, and fully equipped, we are the new improved Nigeria Police Force. We fight crime, we bust syndicates, whatever the crime, wherever the hideout, the Nigeria police force will get you busted. Stop kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, pipeline vandalism and other criminal activities. Be productive, be security conscious. Join the police force to secure your life and property. This message is from the Nigeria Police Force Public Relations Department.
Your favorite Maggi star now wears a new look. Its great taste and quality still remain the same. With Maggi, every woman is a star.
Don't you know? Time that money, so use them well. Don't you know that I will never let you down? Just a little love, just a little giving, show some love.
Enjoy free 250 MB every week just by recharging on Airtel Recharge Plus. Dial *479# to know more.
Airtel, the smartphone network.
You in the air-conditioned office with the itchy throat. Strepsils. Girl in the spotlight with the raspy throat. Strepsils. You in the pollution. Yes, you. Dry throat. Strepsils. Hello in the downpour with the scratchy throat. Take Strepsils. Strepsils, with its soothing medicinal ingredients, will heal the harm done to your throat from external factors. Strepsils! Strepsils! Strepsils, for a dry, itchy, raspy, scratchy throat.
Kehinde suffers from indigestion. His twin Taiyi suffers from heartburn. Sometimes it's the other way around, or both. That's why they use Gaviscon Double Action. It soothes within 3 minutes and lasts for up to 4 hours. For double relief from heartburn and indigestion, Gaviscon Double Action.
Your perfect family is under threat by germs. Infectious diseases are now the world's biggest killer of adults and children. These infectious diseases are caused by germs. They are everywhere. An average human being comes in contact with over 1 million germs daily in unclean water, dirty surfaces, in the toilets, on cuts and wounds, on your clothes. Germs can cause deadly diseases like typhoid, diarrhea, flu, and cough. To protect your family from germs, use the power of Dettol's One Capful for surface cleaning, in your bathing water, in your laundry water, for first aid to protect your family from up to 100 illness-causing germs.
Introducing Dettol Antiseptic Liquid in Sachet for only 40 Naira.
Endorsed by the Nigerian Medical Association.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. On the business news segment, experts call for improved incentives to encourage exports in the non-oil sectors of the economy. Chimobi Watanaje is standing by with the business news.
Glad to have you join us on the business news segment. As part of efforts to improve the Nigerian economy, some key industry players say for Nigeria to achieve its zero oil plan of diversifying the economy, farmers have been encouraged to focus more attention to products that has high export value, as this will attract more foreign direct investment into the country and increase the nation's foreign reserve. The Chief Executive Officer, Nigerian Export Promotion Council, Olusegun Awolowo, says it is important to create awareness and grant access to export information for growing Nigerian businesses, as well as give incentives to growing export businesses in the country.
That's where we're strong, is in agriculture. So we need to just increase production and productivity all across all those sectors. We look at cocoa, we're about 300,000 metric tons. That is not acceptable. You know, we need to replant on our plantations. We need to build new farms. We need to just grow more.
From that report, we move into the closing figures on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange during the week ended 19th October 2018, where the market closed on a positive note at plus 0.54%, while the all-share index recorded 32,841.69 basis points. Analysts are of the optimistic that the market will experience marginal increases.
The total gainers cumulatively for the week stood at 60 as against losers of 89. So the breadth is still showing that the market is not bullish yet. It's still bearish. The market is still bearish, but we're still hopeful that as more results of the third quarter performance of these companies are listed, I'm talking about next week, that we may likely witness more marginal appreciation.
And that's business news for now. The program continues in a moment. I'm Chimobi Walter Naji.
Thank you very much, Chimobi, there for the business package. Next for us now is a review of some of the papers we have this morning.
All right, we now welcome our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Atebe, who is already in the studio. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Kirian. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Bayo, good to see you.
Thank you.
All right, so Kirian, let's
begin
with
we have a couple of national dailies here to review this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. First, let's begin with the Daily Trust. Daily Trust. Directly below the nameplate of Daily Trust, we have some striking stories here. Minimum wage labor unions threaten strike November 6. That's on page 3. Fireshare's trial begins today. It's on page 4. And concerns as MTN delays listing on the NAC, that's Nigerian Stock Exchange. Now, the main headline this morning on Daily Trust is a curfew in Kaduna with a rider. Government urges calm as State Security Council meets today. And the photograph that you find on Daily Trust front page is that of the late legal luminary, Justice Idris Kutigi. And I hope Kingsley will tell us more about this very important personality in the Nigerian law practice. Now, below that photograph, we have some stories too. 83 million voters, 89 parties for 2019 elections, says INEC. Now, federal government begins payment of ex-airways workers this week. You can find these stories on the pages 13 and 17.
All right, Bayo, let's take your comments, because we have a number of headlines there that speak to some very important
let's start with the 24-hour curfews in Kaduna. In fact, the Kaduna State Executive Council, the Security Council, will be meeting today. This followed reported spillover from the crisis in Kaswa Magani in Kajuru local government area of Kaduna. People in the area of Sabo, Narai, as well as part of Kaduna Metropolis, Kakuri, were found running helter-skelter. Some youths were armed with weapons and were moving around. Security men, including soldiers, had placed themselves on strategic positions and placed the situation under control. The crisis in Kaswa Magani has consumed as many as 50 persons, and it's been ongoing. Kaduna has had its fair share of crises for years, but luckily in the past few years it has simmered. And the crisis had always continued in the southern Kaduna between the herders and the farmers and other militant groups. However, the crisis in Kaduna Metropolis, which has virtually divided the city into two, is now coming back, and something has to be done very critically to address that. The nation is mourning the passing on of former Chief Justice of Nigeria, Idris Kutigi, who died at a London hospital at age 78. He was Chief Justice between 30th January 2007 and 31st December 2009. It will be recalled that he was the chairman of the Constitutional Conference 2014. The Chief Justice of Nigeria has directed that the flags at the Supreme Court and many courts around the country should be flown at half-staff or half-mast in abeyance and in respect to the passing on of the jurist. A condolence register is also to be opened at the foyer of the Supreme Court for the justices and other persons to pay their last respect. Justice Kutigi gone home.
Yeah, absolutely. May his soul rest in peace. But as you've said, the key points of his career. He was, of course, a judge in Niger State. He hailed from Niger State, by the way, and it was from Niger State, of course, that he got moved to the upper bench. One of the, apart from the various decisions, of course, that he sat on in terms of the paneling of judges or justices at the Supreme Court, by the time he was leaving office as the Chief Justice of the Federation in 2009, the then head of state, Umaru Yar'Adua, was indisposed, gravely ill. Unfortunately, he would pass away months after that. And the president wasn't available to administer the oath of office on the successor. So he now took the extraordinary step of administering the oath of office on his successor. And that was, of course, well within his authority to do. It was administration of the oath of office. Had nothing to do with that. That matter often came up as one of the signposts of the last acts he performed. And as you rightly said, Bayo, he was also chairman of the political conference organized by President Goodluck Jonathan in 2014. The deputy of that conference, of course, was Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, former Minister of...
In fact, that's a huge contribution to the development of the judiciary in this country. Has contributed immensely and in diverse ways, as essentially and Bayo have explained.
Yeah, Kirian, just before we move on to other stories, I have the Daily Sun at page 43. The Daily Sun, of course, is still reporting on the killings in Kaduna and saying El-Rufai imposes 24-hour curfew on Kaduna metropolis. That's the story there from the Daily Sun. I'm wondering, how do you implement a 24-hour curfew on a state that is also a thoroughfare to other states? So if I'm driving from Abuja to Kano and I have to pass through Kaduna, so what happens to me? Or I'm coming from Kano, I'm going to Abuja, what happens?
The implication is that it's either you are stuck at the entry point or you will have security may escort you through the city.
Is that arrangement put in place? Because as Kingsley pointed out, people must move.
I cannot speak for that, but you see, when there is massive threat to life, for the state government to have announced 24-hour curfew, it points to the gravity of the security threat on ground.
Bayo, there's no doubt about that. As you also pointed out, no fewer than 50 persons, in fact, some estimates were saying 55 persons had been killed in the course of the crime. I'm just saying, that is for Kaduna State. Now, what we have the experience when you have restriction of movement in the course of elections, where you have standalone elections, say, in some states, and you say, okay, there's no movement, and then you have major arterial roads that pass through those locations. What happens to persons who are committed? I just ask a simple question now. What happens for those who are moving in from Kano across through Kaduna, or from Abuja or elsewhere? So was that what happens? You cannot have individual carrier. You cannot have individual escorts, provided by the security agencies. I think that's one point to clarify.
Yes, and that's why I raised the issue of a master plan by the police or the military, those who are directly involved in ensuring compliance. Something I'm sure must have been done about it, because people have to move, and you can't restrict movements, interstate movements, right? Because the issue is domicile in Kaduna, so to speak, right? So others should not be affected. That's a very good point you raised. Yes.
Let me take other headlines from the Daily Sun, and then you have the others from Nigerian Pilot. Also, still on the Daily Sun, page 43. You have two headlines there, three actually. It says, women farmers most marginalized, that's according to the federal government. And federal government drills 17,000 teachers on professional license. In 2019, that's the last story we're taking from there, 2 million youths launch Vote Your Future campaign.
All right, now, so before Bayo comes in for his final analysis, the Nigerian Pilot is an inside story on page 11 of the Nigerian Pilot. I have two of them here, but first let's take this one. Page 11, Buhari condemns renewed violence in Kaduna. And again, Buhari regrets Abia pipeline explosion, blames vandals. And then your NYSC discharge certificate, key to securing job appointment. All right, there was still on Nigerian Pilot, the inside story again on page 7. Federal government slams 11-count charge over 1.2 billion loot, with the 2 riders to be docked today. That's a fire share. Then Obanikoro, Dasuki's aide, 20 others to testify against him. Bayo.
Well, let's go to the alarm raised by organized labor that by November 6th, they will go back to the trenches and declare a strike if nothing was done to reach a conclusion about the current national minimum wage. The joint statement was signed by the NLC leader, Yuba Waba, Bobo Kaigama of the Trade Union Congress, and Joe Ajero of the United Labour Congress. They said we shall embark on a nationwide strike. But the labor's contention is based on the issue of the figure. Labour is contending that a figure has been reached and there's no reason why 30,000 that has been reached should not be implemented. But Minister of Labour says that in issues about salary and minimum wage are fortuitous negotiations that are always contentious. And he gave a picture of what transpired. He said the current negotiation was beyond the normal tripartite thing, which is usually labor, government, and employers. This time, it had to include Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, NASIMA, as well as small and medium-scale employers, and 2 governors representing the governors. He said the arguments went like this. Labor started from 66,500, came down to 56, went to 45, and went to 43. Organized private sector started with 22,000 and increased it to 25. Federal government started at 22,700, increased it to 23, and stopped at 24,000. States started from 2,700 and said they cannot afford to pay more. However, Labour had considered 4 scenarios, and the scenarios was eventually dropped to 38,000 and 37,000. Eventually, when organized Labour came with 30,000, Labour took a recess and came out and said that for peace and sacrifice, Labour will accept 30,000. However, the federal government and state government had not accepted that 30,000. That is the contention. The dilemma here now is a double dilemma. Government says it wants to help review salary upwards, but it cannot afford, it doesn't have the ability to pay. On the other hand, the minimum wage cannot take the worker home, and employers cannot afford to pay more. The challenge here is, if you say 30, you increase from 18,000 to 30, that is 60% increase. What we have not been told, and it's appearing to everybody that those who are in negotiating have no sympathy for the ordinary worker who cannot live on 18,000. But it is beyond that. When you say increase of from 18 to 30, that is 60% increase. It means from level 4 up to level 17. Is everybody going to have 60% increase? So we are not considering the weight of the whole wage bill. We are looking only at the 18,000 increase. There is a lot more to that.
Who are the we, Bayo?
We, that is you and I and everybody.
I'm not part of it. I'm
okay.
not part of it. I'm not part of it. Kirian, I don't know whether you are part of it. Because this is part of the consideration. The argument has always been made. Look, that is the floor. That is the floor. 18,000, as we have it minimum wage now, is the floor. And whatever is going to be added on top now becomes the new national minimum wage. But what happens, and that's been our experience, whenever you raise the floor for the minimum wage, there is a knock-on effect on all the other levels. And that's why you see that the country's wage bill balloons. So I'm not part of that we.
Okay.
But Kirian, you have a point.
You see, our topic this morning is actually going to deal with all of this, because we're going to have some professionals join us this morning for the conversation on the issue of strike action. Because, of course, you can't talk about strike action without talking about wages and salaries and the capacity of states and the private sector to pay.
The governors have been saying that, listen, we have a challenge paying 18,000.
Yes. So in fact, at the last meeting, the chairman of Governors Forum said 35%, 55% and others are owing salary arrears at 18% minimum wage.
But would there be a possibility of increasing, what accrues to states, in the event of accepting a particular amount of money? Is there a possibility to increase?
If you increase, for instance, maybe you tinker with, maybe the National Assembly tinkers with the revenue allocation formula. The purpose is not to spend, whatever has accrued to this thing on recurrent expenditure. It is to enable you, the states and the local governments, have more to invest on capital infrastructure.
One of the opinions, that I came across, last week, is suggesting that across board we have to, for instance, the members of National Assembly, the politicians, right, also look at what they are earning as well, because the workers are trying to, compare, because after all said and done, we all go to the same market, right? Yes. And when somebody is paid a jumbo salary and others get something that could not even, manage them transport-wise, in the course of a month's, working period, then of course that becomes a problem.
All right. There's a story I would like to draw our attention to. Yes. Kirian read it from the Nigerian pilot, Bio. Yes. And that story is on page 11 of the Nigerian pilot. It says, your NYSC discharge certificate key to securing job and appointment. That appointment, of course, has to do with political appointment. Let the mistaken impression not be created that if you don't have an NYSC discharge or an exemption certificate, you cannot get a job or you cannot get a political appointment. It is when you have been through an institution of higher learning, yes, and you are below age 30, that's if you
graduated below age 30.
Below age 30, that you must be deemed to have participated in the NYSC, or if you have an exemption certificate, for you to now present it when you are seeking a job or when you are seeking a political appointment. If you stopped at a certain level of education and you are offered a political appointment, nobody requires you to go and get an NYSC discharge certificate. Yeah. Nobody requires you to go and have an NYSC certificate, so you don't go to Oluwole and try to fix something. All right, Bayo, let's take our editorial this morning.
Thank you.
Editorial? And that's from the New Telegraph newspaper. And it's at page 15. It comes to the kicker, INEC budget, where National Assembly shunned partisan politics. It's talking about what happened after months of brinkmanship over the possible change in the headship of the two chambers of National Assembly, and how the two chambers have also now passed the INEC budget for the 2019 elections. The editorial says Nigerians are praying and hoping that lawmakers will sustain the spirit of accommodation rather than the pursuit of narrow, sectional and partisan interests, mostly guarded by external influence and the politics of the 2019 elections.
Well, I think the editorial is centering about the wonder or the magic that did it. There was so much tension from July 24th and with the defection of the leaders of both chambers to the other party. So much so that when they resumed, everybody assumed that there will be an uproar. But the pointer is that in a political atmosphere, what you require is multi-partisanship for the purposes of national interest. That is what we saw exemplified this time around. And so all the contentions went away. But it's not far-fetched. Why? Because election was at stake, and all of them have their interests at stake. It's either they pass the electoral bills and pass the budget of INEC. If not, the chances of having a 2019 election was being threatened, and therefore their interest was threatened. The editorial is, however, saying that if partisanship is played at a minimum level and multi-party interest, and particularly national interest, is brought to the fore, the National Assembly can achieve more than they have always been achieving. That is the essence of the editorial, and I totally share that perspective.
All right, Bayo, that's the most that we can take. We'd like to thank you for being around. See you tomorrow. Okay. Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria. Still, we'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be dealing with the Federal Executive Council and its white paper on industrial relations. No work, no pay. And of course, if you have a lockout, the workers are entitled to their pay.
Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There's no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Can you write? First Entertainment Ideas Concept, in conjunction with National Commission for Museum and Monuments, presents Latin America Motorcycle Association Rediscover Nigeria Tour. Touring Nigerian Museum and Heritage Sites in 13 states and 13 days from the 23rd of October 2018. Chief Host, Honorable Minister for Information, Arts and Culture, Lai Mohammed. For sponsorship details, call Ernest on 090-3456-4388. Godwin 080-3701-5237. Uzoma 080-2980-0549. Salong 080-3225-0153. or more 080-9440-9719. Lama, touring to rediscover.
Your favorite Maggi star now wears a new look. Its great taste and quality still remain the same. With Maggi, every woman is a star.
Helen! Your kitchen gets 10 out of 10.
Thank you.
This also gets a 10. Should we see the toilet now?
Sure.
This gets just 1.
It is clean.
But not perfect 10.
Better than my detergent and bleach? Impossible.
Challenge? Try the new Apic 10X.
Compared to bleach and detergent, Apic sticker formulation removes yellow stains times better, giving you a sparkling clean toilet.
Wow.
Now you also take that
Apic 10X challenge.
Also available in 200 ml pack.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Madam. Brought us as usual.
As usual.
You have no problem.
For the three put you are welcome, sir.
As usual, yeah?
Welcome. You take that one. You take that one. You don't understand? We want Nigerian homegrown rice. Finish. You don't have? You don't have?
Join the rice revolution today.
No other rice that tastes like Nigerian rice.
Are you sorry?
That's the Nigerian rice we are talking about. Chocolate made in Nigerian rice. Healthy food. I'm going to bring Mrs. Mobu to come to chocolate rice made in Nigeria here. And see how it are made.
Correct.
And how they are cook it.
Correct.
Homegrown rice are good for your health. It boosts our economy and give employment to our people.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
What's up?
His friends didn't come.
Hey, let's practice.
But you're going out.
Don't worry about me.
Nothing satisfies a mother more than seeing a child grow up. But I know as he sweats, he'll face the risk of germs which can cause skin irritation.
That's why you need the new best ever Dettol Cool. Its new advanced formulation with extra menthol protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs and gives your family icy cool freshness.
Growing up needs Dettol protection.
Every new day deserves a great taste for a great start with Nescafe 3-in-1. It all starts with a Nescafe.
All right, now before we start off conversation on today's topic, let's get Mutare Ikben's report, a background report actually, to usher in our topic this morning.
There is the old saying that a worker deserves his wages, which assumes that work and pay are inseparable. This saying has been constant in labor relations in Nigeria as employers and employees contest on wages and remunerations. This relation has been smooth in many ways but gets strained when workers are not paid their wages or they have resort to strikes to press home their demands. As workers and employees go forth and back on disputes, how to reduce the persistent disruptions to the economy remains a concern to all. The government set up a panel in April 2016 to smoothen industrial relations, which submitted its report in October 2017. Thereafter, a committee was set up chaired by the Minister of Labour to draft a white paper on the report with intent to harmonize contentious or grey areas. After its work, it submitted a report to government which was approved by the Federal Executive Council with effect that employers of labor who lock out workers must pay them for the period they didn't work. While in the public service, the no work, no pay rule should be applied by employers when they embark on industrial action. This development has already generated a lot of reactions, especially from the labor unions who rejected it and called it an attempt to shut out labor from negotiating their welfare. Government has also explained that it is not implementing a new policy, but simply carrying out what has been in the law books. What is the implication of the decision to implement the no work, no pay law? Will this put an end to incessant strike and guarantee that workers get their rights? These are questions guests shall be answering on Good Morning Nigeria today.
All right, thank you very much, Natala Mohammed Garba, for that background report. We already have guests with us here in the Abuja studios as well as at our Lagos Network Center. First, we'd like to welcome Richard Edubo. He's a professor of law and former dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Benin. He's often joined us from our Benin Network studios, but right here with us in the Abuja studios this morning. Professor Edubo, a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, also here is Mrs. Omabia Udeme Akpan. She's Director, Trade Union Services and Industrial Relations at the Federal Ministry of Labor and Employment. Mrs. Udeme Akpan, pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and we also have here in our studio Public Affairs Analyst Jide Ojo. He's also a regular on Good Morning Nigeria. You're welcome, Jide Ojo.
Thanks for having me. Good morning, Nigerians.
And from Lagos, we are being joined by Sunday, the president of the Trade Union Congress, Comrade Sunday Olusoji Salako. So you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria from Lagos.
Good morning.
All right, Kira is first vice president of the 2UC. That's our guest, Olusoji Salako. Once again, I would like to thank him for being with us on this conversation. Let's start straight away by going to the director who is in charge of Trade Union Services and Industrial Relations. Give us a background to the Federal Executive Council white paper on a wide variety of issues relating to industrial matters.
Right. For several years, there have been issues, especially in the public service, that had caused disruption of service. And so in 2016, the present administration set up a technical committee to look into the issues like public servants remaining permanently in the executive bodies of trade unions, issues like skipping, which is really in relationship with the salary structure in the public service.
What is skipping?
Skipping, right. Now, for those of us that are in the core civil service, we have a salary structure which graduates from 1 to 17, 1 being the least and 17 being the highest. But when you get to grade level 10, you don't have 11. You skip 11 and you get to 12. And so some other sectors decided to start skipping without reference to due process. So the government also needed to address that. The issue of residency training are one of the issues that the white paper addressed. So there are a catalog of issues that government set up the committee just to address and profile solutions so that we don't have disruptions of operations and services in the public service.
Now, madam, perhaps in the course of this conversation, you will lead us more into some of the critical issues that you raised that led to the white paper in the first place. But one may be, may like to ask as to why is it necessary at this stage in a national life to invoke the policy that is known to have been in the books for a very long time? Why has it become so important now?
You know, I wouldn't say we're invoking. Like you rightly said, there's already a policy on ground. Now, government, federal government in particular, is the highest employer of labor in the country. You have a responsibility to remind your employees of what is contained in the law, so that they are aware that when they take actions that are not in line with due processes, there are consequences and there's actions. So what government is just doing is to bring to the notice of the workforce, its workforce, that this law exists and you should be ready to pay the price or face the sanctions if you go out and do what is not expected to you.
I asked this question because government never complied to this policy in the past. So when people go on strike and return, they get their pay.
No, it's not. You are not correct. I'm aware that some time ago, NARD, that's National Association of Resident Doctors, they proceeded on industrial action to start with their essential services. Government invoked that provision of Section 43, and they didn't get their pay. So it would be wrong for anybody to say that it had not been implemented. It has. It's only that the ILO convention from which we drew that particular provision of the Trade Dispute Act gives discretion to the employer whether to implement or not to implement. But to say it's not in our law, it is in our law, and we've already been executing it.
What is the, we'll start with you, Mrs. Udeme Akpan, what is the potential amplitude of the enforcement of this provision which already exists? You talked about the federal government, of course, because you are the Federal Minister of Labor and Employment. Will state governments be also obliged to adopt this in the event? Because you have employees of state, for instance, I mean, each time ASU or NUT or some other persons go on strike, and these are public servants employed by their respective state governments, you often have this contentious issue that, you know, they have to get paid even for the product for which they were on strike.
Right. The truth is, we say it's a law. A law has national application. So it's not just the federal government, it's not just the state government. Private employers of labor can rely on that law and refuse to pay any set of workers or group of unionists that decide to go on strike without following due process. It's a law, and we must uphold the rule of law.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go over to our Lagos Network Center, where we are introduced Mr. Sunday Olusoje Salako. He's the first Vice President of the Trade Union Congress. Mr. Salako, you listened to Mrs. Udeme Akpan, who is Director in the Federal Ministry of Labor and Employment. And of course, you are familiar with the details of the government white paper pertaining to the aspect of no work, no pay, as well as lockout and the consequences that would follow if due process hasn't been complied with. What is the reaction of the TUC to these developments?
Well, I had listened to Mrs. Akpan, and I want to thank her for doing the bid of government. But from labor angle, we believe that this is a mischief because there is a law in existence. If there is a law in existence, you don't need the white paper. Why dissipating energy on setting up a technical committee to review a law that is in operation. The Trade Dispute Act that he quoted had been in existence. Employers and employees have been applying and seeking remedies under the law. Why now that we are, at the verge of fixing another new minimum wage, the government is coming out with that? That is the question. Anyway, all organs of Trade Union Congress that are involved and those of NLC that are also involved have been mandated to address the issue once we have circulars in place. As it is now, we are only, talking about speculation. We don't believe that government is serious. When they address circulars, then trade unions, industrial unions involved in such sectors will, address the matter.
Sorry, Kingsley. Are you saying that it's a mischief to have come up with a white paper on an existing law? But from what you have told us right now, it does seem that Labour didn't take that down well. And if that is the position, tell us the position of Labour, because this white paper is out. And if it is implemented by government, what will be the reaction of labor union in Nigeria if no work, no pay is, of course, brought to the table by government?
Resist every attempt to implement one side of a law. Let me also get all this background. When we gather every 1st May to celebrate Workers' Day, we are not celebrating because workers are in opulence or workers are happy. We are celebrating because we can talk about workers' rights. The right to strike, the right to picketing is inalienable right of the worker. No government regulation can take that away. It is enshrined by ILO conventions. And there's no local legislation. As long as Nigeria is a member of ILO, no local legislation can take that right from an average worker.
Okay, well, still with you, Mr. Salako, just before we bring in Professor Richard Idubo, there have been concerns, particularly on the part of employers, private and public sectors, with regard to insensate industrial actions by employees, wildcat strikes you find all around, and the fact that these strikes go on and workers feel that no matter what, at the end of the strike, they will still get their pay. What kind of economic situation can tolerate that without severe consequences?
Well, there are two sides to this issue. You are being sympathetic to the employers. If government do what is right, the workers will not need to go on strike. Look at the issue of the minimum wage. Have you seen the seriousness on the part of government? How can the government that is, living above every other means and saying that workers should not get what that is due to them? So you cannot say that we want to take the right to strike, because that is the pain you can apply to an employer to ventilate your anger. The right to strike is not something that can be taken away from a worker. That has been in existence from 1860. Remember the issue of the workers' rally in 1860. That's what gave background to the issue of strikes, picketing, and the rest of them. So no employer can take that away. No employer can take that away. If you do what is right, workers don't just go on strike, without any reason. It is when they are pushed to the wall. You have a minimum wage that was due as far back as 2016, and government does not have the sensitivity to say, okay, let us negotiate a new minimum wage. You set up a committee on just November 17 last year, and you never allowed the committee to start work until March this year, and yet you are coming with different scenarios. I watched your newspaper review and your comments on the issue of minimum wage. And I want to say that the Minister of Labour was economical with the truth. That was not what transpired at that meeting. The Convention 131 and 26 of the ILO states the conditions and process for fixing national minimum wage. It is not by one social partner forcing its way down the committee. No, it's by negotiation. And we negotiated and agreed on a figure. And there was no counter motion at that day, only for federal government to come out, the Minister of Labour to come out and say no figure was agreed. That is a blatant lie.
We thank you, Mr. Salako. Well, thank you indeed. We've heard from you, but we will return to you in the course of this conversation because you've raised some issues, critical issues as well. You mentioned the ILO convention. We'll get to know from you what ILO convention says about no work, no pay, because the issue this morning is on the white paper on no work, no pay. Now, let's return to Abuja studio now, where we have Professor of Law and former Dean of the Faculty of Law, University of Benin, and that's Richard Idubo. So you've listened to Mrs. Atman and, of course, Mr. Salako making their own contributions to this discussion. And the issue in question is the white paper. And what's your take on the white paper as released by the federal government with respect to no work, no pay?
Thank you very much. You will kindly allow me to state the law as it is. If it is necessary to state the law as it ought to be, that is a different thing entirely. Going to the law as it is, I am saying emphatically that the issue of no work, no pay is not surfacing for the very first time. It came with the dictatorship of General Obasanjo in 1976. It came with the Trade Disputes Amendment Decree number 54 of that year. Section 32 it was, which is now Section 43. It has said that notwithstanding all other provisions in that statute, in the Principal Act, whenever a worker goes on strike, he shall not, please underline it, he shall not be entitled to wages or salary. In the same way, employers that lock out workers will have to pay for the period that is so locked out the workers. In other words, it's on both sides. That law has been with us, and it has been effectuated as an authorized labor officer with Federal Ministry of Employment, Labor and Productivity. I recall that on the number of occasions that workers were on strike in the private sector, at the end of the strike, and we come out with an agreement to resolve the strike, it is worked out what the workers will do with a view to ensuring that the employers would not have lost out during that period, and the workers would not also have lost out during that period for amity to reign an industrial setting. Consequently, if workers lost 5 days, effort is made to work out the number of hours in excess of the normal hours of work that those workers will work to enable them get their actual salary. We thought that was purposive and it cured the defect. But in the public service where I work, civil service in the first instance and then public service as I am now, that law appears to be honored in the breach rather than in its observance. Consequently, at the end of the day, when workers go on strike, like myself, I have been on strike for the opportune time.
That's ASU.
ASU, yes. Even though we cover the period, the rule generally is that once you are on strike, you are not to be paid. And we have been issued with circular regularly from NLC. If we combat it, that is a different thing. But that the statute is not in place is to take a wrong view. It is there, fortified, aimed at curing a defect. But for heaven's sake, it came with the dictatorship of the military, which I have continued to say ought to have been corrected under a democratic setting. At any rate, look at the position of strike at common law. At common law, the position is that where the rights of workers are concerned, the rights of employers are conditioned by the rights of workmen to give or withhold their services. The right to strike is a necessary ingredient in the principle of collective bargaining. But even at that common law, when workers go on strike, at the end of the strike and they are returning, employers do not pay. But the employer will not pay. He must not also discriminate against workers if they gave notice at that time. But we have left the common law position since we have statutory provisions on this score. whether dictated by the dictatorship of the military or not, it has become the law of the country by reason of Section 315 of the Constitution that accepts them, existing law, that is. They form part and parcel of our laws here, even though coercive. That is the thing. It's not competent for anybody to say that that statute is not there. If government issued a white paper, it's a surplusage as far as I'm concerned. A white paper cannot operate to override the raw provisions of the statute and the place. Government was only addressing its mind to, by way of reminder, let's remind these persons. And I think that is objectively reasonable. Let that not becloud our objective approach to issues. I believe in going on strike when there is need for it. And even the Supreme Court, even our court, per Justice Uwaifo, has said that collective bargaining is not ordinarily enforceable, but it is enforceable when the need arises or when there is strike action, and that a strike action can be coordinated to enforce it. That is even the court in 1993, EDET and Union Bank of Nigeria, PLC. That is the position. With us here, the right to strike appears to have been cut down. Look at the International Covenant on this call, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which is an international instrument on this call. Go to Article 8, Paragraph D. It says emphatically, the right to strike shall continue to be upheld by upheld and recognized, but subject to the law guiding trade disputes in any country, any member nation. So if you make it subservient to the law governing, in Nigeria, the law governing here on this call is that military labor law, Trade Disputes Act, which has not been repealed, which we have continued to acquiesce in. And if we do acquiesce, as we say it in law, a law, good or bad, remains a law until it is repealed. Let us not deceive ourselves. The law exists. Yet, there has been incessant strike, which means we ought to do more serious thing to ameliorate the pain and give effect to it.
All right, Professor Richard Idubo, thank you very much there for your exposition. We'll come back to you in the course of this conversation. Let's bring in now Jide Ojo. Jide Ojo, you've listened to the other three guests. Let's have your take.
Thank you very much. My take is, I think the federal government needs to be very circumspect in dealing with the issue at hand. The federal government may be doing the right thing at the wrong time. And I'm serving this note of warning because we have a very fragile economy. And should this issue not be resolved in a timeous manner, and workers decided to go on strike, recall that our economy is technically just out of recession. Right now, the labor unions have threatened to resume their suspended strike on November 6th. Should the federal government not withdraw this, or should they go ahead to implement this white paper? Now, to the substance of the white paper, I would say it's good and bad. You know, it depends on how you look at it. The issue of residency, that you have 7 years to do your residency as a medical doctor, I think people should not just become permanent, attempt resident doctors. If you can't get it in 7 years, you can as well leave so that others can come in. The issue of lockout, that if you lock out your workers, the workers get paid, that's good. But when it comes to the issue of no work, no pay, you need to tread with caution. Like the vice president of TUC said in Lagos, what prompts workers to go on strike? If we can't deal with that issues, usually workers will not go on strike without serving notice that they are going on strike, whether it's 2 weeks, sometimes 30 days. I've written so many opinions on issues of flight of Nigerian workers, and we do know that in many instances, governments usually ignore these warning notices until the eve of the commencement of the strike. Then you start, re-rolling everybody, oh, let's come and discuss, as it happened over the just suspended, workers strike about 2 weeks ago or thereabout. So for me, why shouldn't we flip it and say, no pay, no work? If people are working and they are not getting paid, that is criminal offense on the part of government and even the private sector that employs such. We have instances of people not being paid their salaries for 8, 12, in fact, sometimes years, and you expect them to still work faithfully and diligently. I mean, you can't make you can't make an omelette without breaking an egg. If you give the conducive working environment to workers, they would definitely not go on strike. I and my family has been at the receiving end of this incessant worker strike. And of course, I condemn it in totality, that it is reckless, it is unpatriotic for workers to continue to go on strike when all avenues of resolving their issues have not been explored. 2 years ago, my younger sister was on admission at UCH in Ibadan. Barely, was being prepared for operation. And before you know it, these resident workers, resident doctors went on strike, and she was forcefully ejected from the hospital. By the time we took her to private hospital, within 24 hours, she died. We didn't even get the letter that we were supposed to get from the UCH authority, even after we have paid for the letter. So many things happened. I mean, nobody is going to compensate me for the loss of my younger sister, but that's the story of many individuals. So it is not right for workers to go on senseless and reckless industrial actions. But the conditions that lead them to this strikes action must be removed. We all go to the same market. We all know what is happening. The rising cost of living has precipitated a situation. I mean, sometimes I wonder, why will people continue to go to work when they are not being paid? So it is good that government wants to enforce no work, no pay. Fine. But what about no pay, no work? If you don't pay me, should I continue to work for you? I have been privileged. I mean, it's another sad story in my life where I worked for a private organization, and for 11 months I was not paid. And when I said, I can't continue to work for you if you don't pay me, they said, okay, we are giving you leave of absence without pay. And up to today, I never recovered my money. So I've had this bitter taste of both sides of the divide. It is not right for workers to go on reckless and senseless industrial actions, but whatever prompts them, when they serve this warning notice, can government, whether at federal, state, or local government, look into their issues and find an amicable way of resolving it before they will have no choice but to go on industrial actions?
All right. Thanks a lot. Kirian, let's thank our guests in the meantime. But we think that our focus, because you have a number of items on the white paper released by the federal government after the Federal Executive Council meeting. What is our issue here is not the right to strike. It is not the right to strike. It was also not an issue. It's not the minimum wage. I mean, the minimum wage is a lingering matter. They've been having the tripartite or multi-party negotiations going on, but the number of points have been raised. I think that it's important to clarify that we're not discussing the minimum wage right now. We're also not discussing, the right to strike is inherent. That's right.
Exactly. The right to strike is inherent. That's the word. And at this point, let's return to Mrs. Akpan. And my question is going to be: the white paper is in place at this moment, and it is believed that it's going to be put into action. Now, does this no work, no pay, does it have any advantage? Does government have any advantage over the labor in the entire, because of course you have greater details of what is in the white paper, because it covers a good number of issues concerning labor and employer relationship?
Well, if your question is addressing the issue of no work, no pay and its implication for government, right, if you invoke the provision of that Section 43, it does imply that workers will not frivolously embark on industrial action. They would want to follow due processes as stipulated by law before embarking on industrial action, and automatically it will help productivity. By the time workers stop going to work, of course, productivity is affected. And so by reminding the workers that, look, there is such a law that prohibits you from embarking on an industrial action without following due process, people will be constrained or restrained from just getting up and saying because something did not happen, they should embark on industrial action, and it will help productivity.
In a situation where workers have exhausted, or labor has exhausted all other options or avenues of negotiation with government, because as Jidojo pointed out, there was never a strike action that just started, immediately without prior to observance of due process, such as giving a warning to government, giving notices to government up to 2 weeks or beyond that, before the day of action.
Let me say that from my office, I'm the Director of Trade Union Services and Industrial Relations. I can say categorically that it's not in all cases that trade unions give the employers notice. At times, you just have a wildcat action. They just say, start the action, because they say it's provoked for one reason or the other. But having said that, when negotiations fail at the conciliation or mediation levels, you have the IAP, Industrial Appreciation Panel. You can escalate, the Federal Ministry of Labour can escalate a matter to the Industrial Arbitration Panel. It can even be escalated to the National Industrial Court of Nigeria. So there are other avenues. It doesn't really stop with the parties directly involved in the negotiations. It can be escalated.
From your experience in the Trade Disputes Office or Trade Industrial Relations Directorate in the Ministry of Labour, what are usually the triggers for industrial action? Because oftentimes you hear ASUP, the other one is for colleges of education. I'm not sure whether it's COSUP or something, but ASUP. So you don't hear, sometimes they will tell you, carry on this. You will hear, because you read that they said that they reached certain agreements, with the government, and the government was supposed to have fulfilled its own part of the bargain. At some point, they haven't done that. They haven't revised it since 2000 and whatever. So if you don't do this one in the next 7 days, we'll give you a warning strike. 3 weeks after that one, we'll go on a full-blown strike. That's what we hear. But from your experience, what is usually the trigger for the kind of actions that we find, whether duly or wildcat?
Right. The very first thing that I have noticed is the issue of recognition of trade unions. Now, the law stipulates that whenever workers express their interest to join a trade union, it's obligated. The employer has an obligation to recognize that trade union. Now, oftentimes, management is averse to having its workers unionized. And so they try to stop them, and that results into automatic industrial action. Now, another thing that I will say is the cause of industrial action is what you alluded to, the issue of not implementing collective agreements. It could be in form of communique, memorandum of understanding, memorandum of terms of settlement. But Federal Ministry of Labour, we uphold the sanctity of collective agreement. Now, what government is trying to, even though you said we are not looking at the issue of minimum wage, I quite agree, but let me say that what the federal government or government is trying to guard against in that negotiation is to have a situation where they are coerced by unions to sign an agreement that is implementable. Federal government may be able to implement the 30,000 naira that the organized labor and organized private sector are projecting, but how about the state government? How about the informal sector? So we've got to reach a point where we have a figure that is comfortable to all the parties in terms of implementation. So failure to implement collective agreement is a major course of industrial actions.
All right, Kisley, let's return to Lagos, to Mr. Salako once more. And I would like to, of course, advise that we try and use, yes, you know, some languages that may not really go down well with the society. So let us try and be polite in the way we approach the conversation. Mr. Salako, right, this discussion cannot be successfully taken, you know, without referencing actions and inactions of labor. Now, before a strike action, there are usually negotiations, and at the point when it breaks down, then strike ensues. And with no work, no pay, when will it be necessary, in your own perspective and the experience you have garnered over the years, when will it be necessary to say, let's go on strike, knowing fully well that no work, no pay is now coming into effect?
Well, let me say that there was never a time that the trade union, you know, or the trade unions were very frivolous in embarking on, you know, strike action. You know, something must have prompted it. Let me give you the scenario that we are in now. What prompted the last strike action that was, you know, back on 27th of September, which was called off on or suspended on 30th September, was that having given government 2 weeks notice that if you don't reconvene this committee, we are going to embark on a strike action. The government ignored that. When even letters were written to that effect, government ignored. So what do you expect Labour to do? So, Mr. Gino just said what is the pathetic situation of some workers. When workers are not paid for several months, even by states and other employers, and nobody is even sensitive about it. What do you expect the workers to do, or the trade union to do? The trade union is there to enforce the right of workers, to ensure that their welfares are not trampled upon by any employer with impunity. And that is it. There was never a time that a strike action, because we also have lawyers among us, and we have lawyers that work for the National Secretariats of Trade Unions, and we don't want to do anything that will run against or run foul of the law. We always give notice. And when you give notice, what are you saying? You are saying the employer should call you for negotiation. But when the employers ignore you, that to hell with what can they do and everything, that will necessitate into action. Even with no pay, no work, no work, no pay rule, workers will still embark on strike action in this country, as long as those conditions that necessitate strike actions are still prevalent in our system. We must do what is right. Minimum wage expired. You said we don't want to discuss about it, but that's what instigated government into coming out with this white paper. Now, in 2016, this thing expired. The workers, were sympathetic with government. We waited patiently. Nobody commended workers. In 2017, had gone. We are in 2018. 2018 is rounding up. And government is not doing anything. You have increased pump price of fuel by over 85%, devalued the naira by over 100%, and now workers are in great pain. What can 80,000 do? That is what we are asking, and nobody seems to be ready to negotiate, to even discuss, assuage the pain of the worker, even if you're not giving them anything. It is not true that state governments cannot pay. During the committee, we received input from 21 state governments. Only Ekiti said he was still consulting. Other states quoted 45. Some said, whatever you agree, you are going to pay. How can the state governments now come out and say, no, they cannot pay?
All right, Mr. Sunday Salako, thank you very much. I just wanted us again to backtrack a bit and get some of the facts right. The Federal Executive Council did not, in its resolution, take account of the negotiations over the minimum wage. The technical committee was indeed set up in 2016 and submitted its report in 2017. So, of course, you have various procedures for bringing a draft white paper to council. So, the federal government, that's to say through the Federal Executive Council, isn't just now issuing this white paper in order to frustrate the ongoing negotiations with regard to minimum wage. That's one point. Now, I would like you to respond to this, because we're talking about a situation where you have almost uncontrolled industrial actions by all kinds of unions and all kinds of bodies. I'll give you one example. We have seen in this country in the past, and perhaps also not too long ago, where, for instance, tanker drivers, petroleum product tanker drivers, on account, unfortunately, when they get to lose one or two of their members from the excesses of either policemen or law enforcement agencies, they will say, look, everybody's going to suspend work, and they know how critical they are to the supply chain of petroleum products. These are wildcard actions, and since, of course, Nupeng got politically empowered by June 12th, we have also seen, how oil workers, with matters pertaining to their employers, just a few workers, they will say, okay, we are declaring an industry-wide action. These are the kind of things that, some employers and indeed some commentators have been taking a look at and say, look, how can an economy continue to bleed from these kinds of actions without consequences?
Now, no worker is pleased to go on a strike. That is one thing we must state clearly here. And Mrs. Akpan will attest to that fact that many times she had intervened through her office in a lot of issues. It is only when matters are aggravated beyond, negotiation that, workers embark on strike. And the labor centers will never encourage any of its affiliates to embark on frivolous strike. If that trade union does that, the labor center will not support such. There is no time that labor center will support any of its affiliates to go on a frivolous or reckless strike, because we also know that it causes pain. The last one, even with the widespread application and everything, you saw that the oil workers were still working. So that is to tell you that even workers are very reasonable. We are not on a strike action to disrupt the economy. It's only when we are pushed to the okay, if you are creating an environment, if you are building the economy, is it not the workers that you are using to grow the economy? They are vital elements in the growth and development of the country. And when you don't see to their welfare, what do you expect such workers to do? So it is the pain that creates that opportunity for strike action. Nobody is interested in strike action. We will have also continued with that, warning strike. But because we're also very reasonable people, we look at it and say, okay, there are some employers that are not even, part of this equation. Let us not allow the pain to go over everybody. So that's why we also, had to suspend the strike. But even after suspending the strike, the conditions that necessitated the strike were aggravated. So what do you expect us to do? We are not saying that, trade union should embark on frivolous strike. Nobody wants to, everybody wants to go to work, earn a living, a decent living, and decent wage, and come back and feed his or her family. But when people who are well fed, who are sitting on our distance, you can imagine when government political office holders increase their own revenue, remuneration by over 800%. Every councillor, whether it's in Jigawa or in Lagos or anywhere, receive the same salary. Every political appointee receive the same thing across the state. And yet, workers who are building this, wealth, you are not remembering them, you are not even taking care of them. It is very pathetic. That is the problem.
Thank you very much indeed. You did need to clarify some of the points that you have posited this morning with respect to salaries. There are categories of political appointees, and of course, all the states are not equal in terms of what they pay to their political appointees. We may have to get to that in the course of the program. Well, this is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA, and we're looking at a very critical issue: no work, no pay policy of the federal government. At this point, we'd like to take a break, but when we come back, we will begin a conversation with a professor here with us for him to, of course, lead us into some legal backgrounding of no work, no pay as it affects categories of workers in Nigeria.
don't you people sell imported materials here? As beautiful as the shop is.
Auntie, buying foreign goods does not help our economy. Neither does it boost local production. And the good thing is Nigerian-made products are high quality. Really? And to make Nigeria great again. That is why I only sell made in Nigeria products. Because change begins with me.
I'm convinced. Change begins with me too, huh?
Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Fake news which is shared for malicious purposes is a danger to our peace and security in Nigeria. Misinformation as fake news is a serious threat to our hard-earned democracy and promotes hatred and misunderstanding between our communities. We are all responsible for stopping the spread of fake news in its tracks. So, always check the source and credibility of any news item. Say no to fake news. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information.
All right, well, welcome back. If you just joined us, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We're reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We have some tweets that have come in. Let's take them. And of course, you can still send others through our Twitter handle at NTA GM, and you can see it at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. This one is from Mike Ayankwa. No work, no pay policies welcome development. Let's tell ourselves the truth. Government at all levels have been very magnanimous by not right-sizing the staff strength. How many workers treat a single file in a day or even a week? Many are redundant and still earn salaries. Although the present economic realities may call for salary increase, but how productive is the labor force? Many civil servants end up under mango trees in their offices, eating groundnuts and gossiping on any job done. Organized labor should focus on the output of their members.
And now from Festus Akimwewa, while the proposed no work, no pay policy is necessary to stop workers from producing deliberate chaos, it may not discourage workers from strikes in our country where employers treat workers with contempt. The agreements are not honored and workers are not paid regularly.
This is from Musa T. Muha. It says the implementation of no work, no pay is a welcome development because it will make every worker to perform their duties and responsibilities as they ought to.
All right, from Kachala Mala, no work, no pay as a policy hardly works in Nigeria due largely to the implementation and the judicial system in Nigeria.
This is from Mario 05. That's the handle for this tweet. It says, government has proved that it can't be trusted. Now, if there are negotiations on the table, the government keeps treating it without seriousness, offering nothing tangible, and come out to tell you that you can't go on strike when negotiation is ongoing.
All right, from Delajak Solomon, it must be stated clearly that an employee is under an obligation to work and the employer is under an obligation to pay for his services, just as the employer is entitled to refuse to pay the employee if the latter refuses to work. So the employee is entitled to refuse to work if the employer refuses to pay him wages which are due to him.
Kenneth has this tweet. Now, no work, no pay policy is not a problem, except that the government applies it in a negative way. And I must strongly advise that the policy should cut across political office holders too.
Ushen Melody Abugo says, first, I think we need more to harness our resources for revenue generation before talking of salary increment. We can't continue to borrow to pay salaries. States can't continue to wait for Paris Fund to pay salaries.
Onoye Victor tweets, thanks for this discussion. Do you know that staff of Anambra State Water Corporation are owed salaries and allowances since 2012? The matter comes up today at the National Industrial Court, Enugu, and the state government of course, is responded. It says, how do you expect these families to survive? All right, since the matter is in court.
I want to ask, okay, wait,
since
the matter is in court.
Let's leave it
yes,
at that. So,
okay.
wanted to have the question
yes,
Professor.
Professor Richard Idubo, you've been itching to say something about this no work, no pay. Of course, you gave us an initial backgrounding from legal point of view as to whether it existed or not. Now, we are talking about the implementation of the policy because the release of the white paper by the federal government is an indication that this policy has come to stay and it has to be put in place into practice. What's your reaction?
Yeah, definitely. That is a purposive position, no doubt, which may not at any rate obliterate any industrial action. But we are drawing attention back to the very relevant section 43 of the Trade Disputes Act, which talks about no work, no pay. It appears to be seen that federal government or the auxiliaries of government are allergic to the extension of that provision, which is to the effect that notwithstanding the provision of no work, no pay, the period on which a worker goes on strike shall not count for the purpose of computation of continuity in service. That is a deadly provision, which, if effectuated, may operate to water down or reduce this white cat industrial unrest. It came together. Go and check section 43 of the Trade Disputes Act. It came together. If you are not paying, if you are saying that, okay, what is the issue of no work, no pay, they will eventually pay me. But there's a very terrible extension there, that the period on which workers have gone on strike shall not count for the purpose of computation of the period of service. I thought all employers of labor should look at that. I thought all trade unions should look at that so as to be guided. So that when there is the urge to go on any white cat industrial unrest, you might be paid salary, but that period of service would have been shortened. That is one. What is perhaps escaping the notice of the vast majority of persons, stakeholders in industrial relations parlance, is the fact that no adequate separation of the categories of trade dispute appear to have permeated, seeped into the numbskull of everybody. There are three categories of trade dispute, and each is dominant in its own sphere. The first one, yes, only in 2005 did the National Assembly come out for the very first time to identify only one of these categories, and that is the dispute of right. It identified this through Trade Unions Amendment Act of 2005, which is to the effect that the workers shall not go on strike except when the strike has to do with dispute of right. What then is dispute of right? It refers to accrued rights, not rights in expectancy. Accrued rights, you are owing me salary, we have worked out and is approved. It has gone through all the procedures for the recognition of a collective agreement that I should be entitled to this and that amount every year. But an employer is disabling itself to honor its obligations on that score. That will be threatening that very category of dispute. It means you are asking the workers to go as of right on strike. Go and read this. Obasanjo brought it in through a public bill, the National Assembly in 2005. It again appears to be escaping the notice of all. That is the only area where workers in Nigeria have come to have a right following this. There are two other disputes, categories of dispute actually. We have dispute of interest, called interest dispute. That is a right in expectancy, if you like this very minimum wage that we're talking about. Come and negotiate, etc. They have not been galvanized into fruition. There are rights in expectancy, which cannot be equated with dispute of right as such. So the way of handling all of this dispute, one is susceptible to definitive settlement, and that is the dispute of right. But the dispute of interest is not susceptible. That is the one that usually threatens industrial harmony and the state, where people are haggling. But But that is not the issue now. The third category of dispute is what Madam attempted to refer to a moment ago, dispute of recognition. Recognition dispute. When you're talking about unions poaching into the jurisdiction of any other area, or the employer not according recognition to registered trade union. All of the unions in the country today have been duly registered. They have been structured, unlike what it was before 1978. They have been structured, and therefore it is incumbent on employers of labor to accord recognition to the trade unions operating within its domain. But there is a snag there. If somebody is sitting at Abuja and is writing to an employer in Kaura Namunda, that we have the workers that you have to recognize. When the workers have not tidied up things from the odd end, it will be asking for the moon for that employer to recognize such union. You ought to have done everything, carried out pro tem executive, which the union will come and introduce to the employer. These are areas that we have problems from operational experience and in practice.
Professor Idubo, thank you very much. Respond also to the issue that I asked Mrs. Udeme Akman with regard to the usual trigger for these industrial actions, namely non-observance of collective agreements, usually on the part of the public sector employer.
Okay, that's all right. I will take it holistically, but emphasis can be placed there. Now, collective agreement, which is the offshoot of collective bargaining. You can call it collective bargaining agreement, collective labor agreement, all amounting to the outcome of collective bargaining. At common law, collective agreements are not legally enforceable. I wouldn't know whether there is time, but Justice Lee was obviously of this persuasion when he said agreements such as this, composed largely of optimistic aspirations, presenting grave practical problems of enforcement, and reached against the background of enforceability, of opinion adverse to enforceability, are in my judgment not contracts in the legal sense and are not enforceable at law. Even the Supreme Court of Nigeria, the apex court in 1993, also had the opportunity of looking at the case of Chukwuma and Shell BP, and they had said an extraneous agreement not entered into by parties to a contract of service cannot be the basis of an action unless it is incorporated into the conditions of service of individual worker. So all of these are there. When, therefore, somebody has negotiated, there has been collective bargaining agreement, you have not gone through the the procedure of giving effect to it. And our Trade Disputes Act has all these procedures that we can call in aid. Section 3, subsection 3. Section 7, or the combined effect of Section 7 and 8 of the Trade Disputes Act, Section 13 and 14 of the Trade Disputes Act, all will operate to guide as to the procedure for giving effect to collective bargaining agreement. If you don't do that and you just negotiate and say, hey, come and give effect to this agreement, it will turn out like somebody, a respected professor once told us that these are contracts of imperfect obligation. So that is it. Our government should know, workers should know that whenever you negotiate and you have the agreement, let it go through the process. Going through the process will be a matter for another day. It's not one that we can just start addressing now because I realize that the time is not there.
Prof, look, Gideon, please, I would like you to assist in dissecting some of the issues you raise. In fact, Kingsley, I know you're enjoying these legal terminologies. Absolutely. You're enjoying legal terminologies that Prof has. So Gideon will help us to,
But there's something, sir, that ought not to escape notice. Okay. Just one small thing. Okay. We keep saying notice. We gave 15 days notice. It appears to be seen that a wrong view has been taken by vast majority of players on this call. When Basanjo came out with this statute in 1976, of a truth, it was there. Section 3031 that obligates workers in the essential services sector to give notice as to their intention to go on strike. But by May of that year, after that one came out in January, via Trade Disputes Amendment Decree of that year, 1976, a section came out to say, indeed, Trade Dispute Essential Services Decree of that year, Section 9 at that time, subsection 2, came out to say that during the legal regime of that very Trade Disputes Essential Services Decree, as it then was, Section 30 and 31 shall be suspended.
Okay.
So that the issue of notice is not there. And it is preserved in this extant statute now, 2004, Section 10 of that Trade Disputes Essential Services Act. The requirement of notice has been suspended.
Prof, thank you very much indeed for bringing the historical perspective to this as it pertains to legal actions of government in the past. Let's return to Jide Ojo now, but I'd like you to specifically look at dispute of right, accrued right, as Prof posited, and again a dispute of interest and that of recognition. Do they make sense to you with respect to our conversation this morning on no work, no pay?
Well, I think with due respect to Prof, these are issues that can be canvassed at the courts and maybe national industrial courts and all of that. But the course I am pursuing is that, of course, of natural justice. Natural justice presumes that when people work for you, they get paid based on negotiated terms of engagement. Where you go in, where there is an infraction of such, the right is inherent on the workers to withdraw a service until you do the needful. And let's not make a mistake. Federal government, yes, may be pulling its weight, may be doing the needful, may not have right-sized and downsized, may actually, have enhanced the welfare of workers to the best of its ability. But when you go down the chain, state and local government, you see the sorry state, the flight of Nigerian workers, so much so that you wonder whether they are magicians. How do you expect people to continue to go to work when somebody will tell you, I have no resources to pay you, yet you employed me to provide certain services to be productive, not to be corrupt? How can we fight corruption in a sense, in a situation where the rights and privileges of workers are not given to them as at when due? Whether it's a negotiated way, accrued interest or anticipated interest is secondary. What we should pursue is cause of justice, natural justice, social justice. What is social justice? The rights. I have a right to exist. I have a right to work. And you have found my services useful. That's why you engage me. You have not terminated my appointment, then you cease to pay me. Meanwhile, you are living a life of ostentatious life. I mean, you are living an ostentatious life. You are asking me to tighten my belt. You are loosening your own. You are enjoying yourself. It is not right. That is antithetical to natural justice and social justice.
Mr. Jide Ojo, thank you very much for that perspective. We are pressed for time. But there's something I want to just put on the table. Again, for purposes of clarity. Part of what we have seen in recent decades is that sometimes when some unions go on strike, there's usually no distinction as to who the employer of the union members, who the employers are. I mean, take ASU, for instance, or ASUP, or COASUP. Some of them, these are state universities. Some of them, state colleges of education. Others, were state polytechnics. But when they go on strike, it's as if the federal government is their employer. They are all negotiating with the federal government. State governments are hardly ever there. How do we understand this phenomenon, Professor Richard Edubo? How do we understand this phenomenon of workers banding together and therefore having, as it were, almost indiscriminate or non-discernible employers? Because your negotiations or your industrial action should be against your employer.
Thank you. I will take a shortcut to it. Prior to 1978, we had a multiplicity of weak and inept trade unions in Nigeria. But thanks to Obasanjo's regime, it came out with the restructuring of trade unions. Restructuring trade unions along industrial lines. The implication of that one is that when you have Academic Staff Union of Nigerian Universities, you are talking about all of the universities in Nigeria. So there could be sympathy strike, and sympathy strike has been legitimized by a cut of very superior position. Australia, which we ought to borrow from. Where we are lacking here, Australia remains a place. High Court of Australia, that is. Our Supreme Court can also advert a position there. They've legitimized this in a case that I may not refer to here.
Is it legitimized in Nigeria?
It's the position. I mean, we're talking about, I mean, you are borrowing, you look at, sympathy strike is there. Unfortunately, when you are talking about industrial practice, I'm telling you that sympathy strike is an area that we cannot omit reference to. Because elsewhere, those who led us in this area, they have since given legitimization to this aspect. But that is not it now. In straight answer to your question, look at the problem from against the background of what I have just given now. The restructuring of trade unions along industrial lines. It may have met well, but is a bane of this incessant industrial strike.
All right, Prof, I would like to stop you there, and I appreciate you immensely for your perspective to this conversation. And at this point, we're going to be concluding this conversation for today, hoping to bring you our complimentary segments. And on that note, I'd like to thank a professor of law and former dean of Faculty of Law, University of Benin, Richard Idubo. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
And Mrs. Omabie Udeme, Director, Trade Union Services and Industrial Relations, Federal Ministry of Labor and Employment. It's been a pleasure having you this morning on this show. And Jide Ojo, of course, is one of us as far as topical issues are concerned. Jide, thank you immensely for your time and your thoughts on this program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and in Lagos, let's also appreciate Sunday Olusoji Salako. Thank you very much indeed for your views, which of course came from the labor angle. He is the first vice president of the Trade Union Congress, Comrade Sunday Olusoji Salako. Thank you once again for reaching us all the way from Lagos. All right, it's been a pleasure hosting all of you on this show. Next for us here now is sports.
Nigeria Football Federation target Ademola Lookman came off the bench to inspire Everton to a late victory against Crystal Palace at the Goodison Park on Sunday. Lookman replaces Joe Walcott in the 82nd minute. The winger's third appearance off the bench